For years, my son thought I was just a simple woman working an office job, a quiet mom who lived modestly, never showing off, never asking for much. He had no idea that behind that simple life, I was earning $30,000 a month. I didn't tell him because I wanted him to value hard work, to build his own success, not rely on mine. But the truth always finds its way out, sometimes in the most unexpected places. The night he introduced me to his wife's parents, I decided to run a little test. I put away my designer clothes, left my luxury car at home, and showed up looking like a broke mom who had nothing to offer. What happened at that dinner table revealed everything I needed to know, not just about them, but about my son, his marriage, and the kind of respect money can't buy. Before I dive in, tell me where you're listening from. It always makes me smile seeing how far we all are, yet somehow right here together. My name is Angela. I'm 58 years old, and I have a life that few would imagine. As an executive, director of a multinational corporation, I've been earning close to $30,000 monthly for more than 15 years. I have investments, stocks, a solid bank account, and could easily live in a mansion, drive luxury cars, and flaunt expensive jewelry. But I chose a different path. I've lived in the same 2-bedroom apartment for almost 2 decades. I drive a common 7-year-old car. I wear simple clothes bought at department stores. Not because I need to save money, far from it, but because I learned that true value isn't in the things we display, but in the peace we carry within ourselves. My son Marcus, now 34, grew up thinking his mother was just an administrative employee with a modest salary. I never corrected that impression. I wanted him to value work, effort, to understand the worth of every penny earned honestly. I wanted him to build his own path without depending on my bank account. And it worked. Marcus graduated on a scholarship, built his career, and 2 years ago married Camille, a woman who seemed sweet and gentle. I say seemed because I was never sure. Something about her polite smiles troubled me, as if there were layers of pretense I couldn't penetrate. Then came the phone call that would change everything. "Mom, Camille's parents are in Atlanta and want to meet you. We've scheduled dinner Saturday at the Magnolia Room." The Magnolia Room, one of the most expensive restaurants in the city, where an appetizer costs more than many people earn in a day. "Do they know anything about me?" I asked. There was a brief but revealing silence. "I told them you work in an office, that you're simple." That word, simple, came out like an apology, almost like shame, as if I were a problem to be explained. Something inside me broke. "All right, Marcus, I'll be there." After hanging up, I stood looking at my apartment, comfortable, clean, but without ostentation. No expensive paintings on the walls, no designer furniture, no luxury items in sight. The kind of place someone with my salary shouldn't inhabit. An idea began forming in my mind. A dangerous idea, perhaps a bit cruel, but irresistible. If they expected to meet a simple woman, then I'd give them exactly that. I'd take the performance to its conclusion. I wanted to see how they would treat someone they considered beneath their social status. Saturday arrived, and instead of choosing any of my quality but discreet clothing, I went to the back closet. There I kept some old faded garments I maintained for household chores. I chose a formless gray dress with subtle stains that no washing could remove. I put on worn, unpolished shoes. I tied my hair in a careless ponytail. No makeup, no jewelry, not even a watch. I looked in the mirror and barely recognized the woman staring back at me. She looked like someone life had defeated, someone invisible, forgettable, exactly what I wanted. I took my oldest canvas bag, where I placed a basic credit card to maintain the charade. Hidden in a secret compartment, however, was my platinum card, the one I use for corporate expenses with a practically unlimited limit. A small insurance policy for any emergency. The taxi dropped me in front of the Magnolia Room promptly at 8 o'clock. A white-gloved doorman opened the door with a smile that wavered slightly upon seeing my clothes. It was already beginning there. I entered the lobby illuminated by crystal chandeliers. Elegant people conversed softly, champagne glasses gleaming under the golden light. And then I saw Marcus standing beside a table in the back. Next to him, Camille, dazzling in a cream dress, jewelry sparkling on her neck and wrists. Seated at the table, presumably, were her parents. I walked slowly toward them, observing how other patrons looked at me, some with curiosity, others with poorly disguised disdain. I was already accustomed to reading people, an essential skill in the corporate world. As I approached, I saw Marcus's face change. His eyes widened, a mixture of confusion and embarrassment. Camille saw me next, and her smile froze. "Mom, you came," Marcus said, his voice tense. He gave me a stiff hug. "Of course I came, dear. I wouldn't miss it for anything." Camille approached, kissed my cheek quickly. "How good that you could come, Angela." She introduced me to her parents. "Dad, Mom, this is Angela, Marcus's mother. Richard and Sandra Robinson." He was a businessman in the real estate sector, according to what Marcus had told me previously. She was a socialite involved with charitable institutions, the type that organizes benefit galas where admission costs more than most workers' monthly salary. Richard extended his hand with a weak, brief shake. Sandra only nodded, her eyes scanning my clothes, my bag, my hair. Her complete evaluation in 3 seconds. Her verdict was clear in her pressed lips. "Please sit down," she said, indicating the chair farthest from her. I sat and observed the table. Silver cutlery, crystal glasses, linen napkins, an arrangement of fresh orchids in the center. Everything impeccable. Everything calculated. The waiter appeared with luxurious menus. I opened mine and feigned difficulty understanding. "Everything's in French," I commented with a deliberately insecure voice. Sandra exchanged a quick glance with Richard. "Would you like me to order for you?" "That would be very kind," I responded, lowering my gaze. Sandra called the waiter and ordered for me. "Bring the simple salad to start and chicken for the main course," she said. Then she added, lowering her voice, but not enough. "It's the most economical on the menu." Marcus looked away, clearly uncomfortable. Camille studied her own menu with unnecessary intensity. And so began one of the most revealing nights of my life. Wine was served, an expensive Bordeaux that Richard made sure to mention the price of. $220 a bottle, but worth every penny. Sandra raised her glass in a toast. "To family," she said, "and to new friendships." The hesitation before the word friendships was subtle, but intentional. It was already clear I wasn't considered part of the family. I was an intruder, an anomaly to be tolerated. The initial conversation was predictable. Superficial questions about my life, my work, my apartment. I answered everything with half-truths, playing the role of a working-class woman struggling to get by. "So you work as an administrative assistant?" Sandra asked, delicately cutting her filet mignon. "Yes, for many years," I replied. "Same company." "Fascinating," she said without the slightest interest. "And do you enjoy it?" "It's a job." "Pays the bills." Of course, she murmured as if speaking to a child. "The important thing is the dignity of work, no matter what it is," Richard intervened. "And you live alone in that apartment Marcus mentioned?" "Yes, same place for almost 20 years. "What stability," he commented, carefully choosing his words. "So many people today are always chasing the next bigger and better thing." There's something to be said for contentment. The condescension was palpable. They were praising me for knowing my place, for not aspiring beyond my supposed station. The appetizer arrived. My simple salad was visibly smaller than the others' elaborate starters. Another small, calculated humiliation. "And how was your trip?" I asked, trying to shift the conversation's focus. Sandra brightened. "Wonderful. We were on the Riviera Maya. We have a small villa in Tulum. Nothing extraordinary, just 4 bedrooms, but the Caribbean view is breathtaking." "We stayed 3 weeks," Richard added. "Could have stayed longer, but we have the governor's son's wedding next week." Couldn't miss that. Every word was a stone being stacked, building a wall between us. Every reference to money, connections, possessions was deliberate, designed to establish distance. And you, Angela? Sandra asked. Do you travel much? Not much, I replied. Occasionally I visit my sister in another city. Ah, by bus. Usually, yes. Sandra made a small grimace as if I'd mentioned a contagious disease. Well, everyone does what they can, right? The dinner continued at this pace. They talked about their lives, social events, international travel, recent acquisitions. Occasionally, they'd throw me a question, feigning interest, but their eyes were already drifting before I finished answering. Marcus remained silent most of the time, occasionally attempting to change the subject. Camille followed her parents' lead, adopting the same condescending tone when addressing me. Between the main course and dessert, Richard decided to deepen the conversation. Marcus told us you raised him alone, he said. That must have been difficult. I had my challenges, I replied simply. I admire women like you, Sandra commented, who do what they can with what they have. Not everyone is born with the same opportunities. Her false empathy was almost comical. I could practically see the thoughts behind those calculating eyes. A woman without formal education, without resources, without connections. And how do you feel seeing Marcus now? She continued. Married to our Camille, living in such a nice condo with a promising career. The implication was clear. How did I feel knowing my son had risen in life, had surpassed my condition? I should be simultaneously grateful and intimidated. I'm proud of him, I answered honestly. He worked hard. Yes, hard work, Richard repeated. But it's also important to have the right connections, to be in the right circles. Fortunately, Camille was able to introduce him to some influential people. Marcus shifted uncomfortably in his chair. Camille smiled, placing her hand over his. Dad helped Marcus get that contract with the Aztec group, she said proudly. It was just an introduction, Richard responded with false modesty. The rest was his merit. I didn't know about this. Apparently my son was receiving more help from his new family than he'd told me. The waiter brought desserts. Everyone received elaborate chocolate and exotic fruit creations. In front of me was placed a simple vanilla flan. I chose something light for you, Sandra explained. I know many people aren't accustomed to such rich desserts. At that moment, I realized she was actively trying to humiliate me. It wasn't just condescension. It was deliberate cruelty. Very thoughtful of you, I replied, keeping my voice neutral. While we ate dessert, Sandra began talking about the future. Marcus and Camille are thinking about having children soon, she announced. We're so excited to be grandparents. That's wonderful, I replied, looking at my son who seemed surprised by the declaration. Apparently, this was a decision Sandra had made, not the young couple. Of course, we'll make sure they have everything they need, she continued. We're already considering putting them on the waiting list for Magnolia Academy. It's never too early to secure the best education. Magnolia Academy, the most expensive and exclusive school in the city. A place where 6-year-olds learned etiquette for formal dinners. And you, Angela? She asked with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. What are your plans for the future? Keep working, I suppose, I replied. Can't retire yet. Sandra's smile widened like a predator finally cornering its prey. About that, she said, putting her fork aside and folding her hands on the table. The atmosphere at the table changed instantly. Richard straightened as if they were about to begin a business meeting. Marcus looked at Camille, confused. She averted her gaze, fixing her eyes on the napkin in her lap. She knew what was coming. We're concerned about you, I asked, maintaining an innocent expression. Yes, Sandra continued, her voice taking on a falsely maternal tone. You see, Angela, we all age. Life becomes more difficult, and we understand that your financial situation might not be the most comfortable. The real purpose of the dinner was beginning to reveal itself. Richard nodded gravely. Living costs only increase. Healthcare, housing, everything becomes more expensive. And for someone with limited resources, we worry this might become a burden for Marcus and Camille in the future, Sandra completed. Ah, so that was it. The true purpose of the dinner was beginning to reveal itself. A burden, I repeated softly. Marcus is a good son, Sandra explained, as if speaking to a child. He feels responsible for you. And while that's admirable, Richard and I don't want that to interfere with the life he and Camille are building together. Mom, please, Marcus interrupted, visibly uncomfortable. It's all right, dear, Sandra responded, patting his hand. Your mother understands we're all thinking about her well-being. I maintained my silence, letting them fully reveal their intentions. What we want to propose, Richard continued, taking control of the conversation, is an arrangement that benefits everyone. What kind of arrangement? I asked. Modest financial support, he said, as if offering a great favor. We can provide you with a small monthly allowance, Angela. Something to supplement your income and ensure you have what you need without having to turn to Marcus. Sandra smiled broadly. We were thinking something like $800 a month. It's not much for us, but I imagine it would make a significant difference for you. I almost had to restrain myself from laughing. $800. An amount I spent on a corporate dinner without thinking twice. And in return? I asked. Because there's always an in return. Sandra's smile wavered slightly. Well, it's not exactly an exchange. It's more of a mutual understanding. What kind of understanding? Richard cleared his throat. We would just expect that you respect the young couple's privacy, that you understand they're building their own life with their own traditions and social circles. The message was crystal clear. They wanted to pay me to disappear, to not embarrass my son and his wife with my inadequate presence in their elegant lives. In other words, I translated slowly, you want me to keep my distance. Sandra had the audacity to look offended. No, that's not it. We just want everyone to find their appropriate place in this new family dynamic. My appropriate place, I repeated. Exactly, she exclaimed, as if I'd finally understood a complex concept. You'll always be Marcus's mother, of course. But now that he's married to Camille, now that he's entering our circle, there are certain expectations, certain standards. Marcus finally found his voice. Mom, Dad, this isn't necessary. My mother has never been a problem. Of course not, dear, Sandra said condescendingly. No one's saying that. We're just trying to be practical, forward-thinking. The waiter approached to ask if we'd like coffee. Richard ordered espressos for everyone without consulting me, a small gesture that summarized the entire night. My preferences, my opinions, my desires were irrelevant. While we waited for coffee, Sandra continued detailing how this arrangement would work, how they could transfer the money discreetly to my account, how I could use it to improve my quality of life, perhaps buy better clothes. She gave a meaningful glance at my worn dress, or even make small improvements to my apartment. Of course, we'd still invite you for special occasions, she added generously. Birthdays, maybe Christmas. The coffee arrived. I took a sip of the bitter espresso and placed the cup back on the saucer with a soft clink. It was time to make a decision. I could continue the charade. I could humbly thank them for their generosity, accept their poorly disguised bribe, and leave. That would allow me to observe how this arrangement would unfold, see how far their manipulation would go. Or I could end the theater right now. I looked at my son. His face showed a mixture of shame, confusion, and discomfort. He was trapped between two worlds, respect for his mother and the desire to please his new family. I looked at Camille. She avoided my gaze, focused on stirring coffee she hadn't asked for sugar in. I looked at Richard and Sandra, so confident in their superiority, so sure of their right to rearrange other people's lives according to their convenience. The decision was made. $800 a month, I said thoughtfully. That's an interesting offer, Sandra smiled victoriously. I'm glad you see it that way. I'm curious, I continued. How did you arrive at that specific amount? Is it based on some cost of living calculation? Richard seemed slightly irritated by the question. It's an amount we consider appropriate, generous. I see, I replied. And how much did you give Marcus and Camille for their house down payment? If I'm not mistaken, properties in that complex cost around $1 million, right? Sandra blinked, surprised by the change of subject. Well, we gave them $50,000. A wedding gift. $50,000, I repeated. And their honeymoon in Greece. I read somewhere that luxury packages to Santorini cost around $15,000. $20,000, actually, Sandra corrected without being able to hide her pride. We wanted them to have the best. So in total, you invested about $70,000 in the young couple. Richard frowned. We don't think of it as an investment. There are children. Of course, I agreed. It's just an interesting choice of words. You invest in your children and try to get rid of the inconvenient mother for $800 monthly. A heavy silence fell over the table. Sandra's smile disappeared completely. Richard had his jaw clenched, knuckles white around his wine glass. Camille looked about to cry. And Marcus, my son, seemed to be in total shock. "Angela," Sandra said finally, her voice now colder. "I think you're misinterpreting our intentions. We're just trying to help." "Help," I repeated slowly. Interesting how that word can mean such different things depending on who uses it. I placed my napkin on the table and leaned back in my chair. My posture changed subtly. I was no longer the timid, submissive woman I'd been portraying all night. Now my shoulders were straight, my chin slightly raised, my eyes directly focused on theirs. "Let me tell you a story," I began, my voice calm but firm, "about a woman you think you know, but don't really know at all." Sandra and Richard exchanged confused glances. Marcus watched me intently. "That woman started as a secretary in a multinational corporation 30 years ago," I began. "She earned minimum wage, lived in a rented room, ate what she could afford with the little left over after paying bills. And then she discovered she was pregnant." Marcus leaned slightly forward. He knew this part of the story, but perhaps not the details. The father of the child disappeared. Her family turned their backs on her. She was completely alone. Sandra seemed momentarily uncomfortable, as if she hadn't expected such personal details. She worked until the last day of pregnancy. Returned 2 weeks after giving birth. She worked 12, sometimes 14 hours a day. A neighbor watched the baby while she was away. Weekends she studied. Night courses, certifications, languages learned in public libraries. All while raising a son alone. I paused, taking a sip of water. That woman rose in the company. From secretary to executive assistant, from assistant to coordinator, from coordinator to manager, from manager to director, from director to vice president. Richard's eyes narrowed. Sandra blinked several times, as if trying to process where I was going with this story. "And do you know how much that woman earns now, Sandra?" "Richard?" They didn't respond. $30,000 a month on average, not counting annual bonuses, profit sharing, and company stock. Marcus dropped his fork, which hit the porcelain with a loud metallic sound. Camille went pale. "That means approximately $360,000 a year. Over the last 15 years, that adds up to more than $5 million in income, not counting investments, which is where most of that money went." Sandra opened and closed her mouth several times without being able to make a sound. "Mom," Marcus began, his voice almost a whisper. "What are you saying?" I smiled at him gently. "I'm saying, dear, that your mother isn't who Richard and Sandra think she is. She's not who you think she is." "You earn $30,000 a month?" he asked incredulously. "For almost 15 years, I confirmed. Before that, it was a bit less, maybe 20,000. Richard found his voice. "That's absurd. If you earned all that, you wouldn't live in that apartment. You wouldn't dress like that." "No, I wouldn't dress like this," I completed, indicating my worn dress. "But this is just for today. A little social experiment, let's say. I wanted to see how you would treat someone you considered inferior." Sandra's face lost all color. "You're saying that you pretended to be poor tonight?" "Yes, exactly that." I opened my old canvas bag. From an inner compartment, I pulled out not the basic credit card I'd shown before, but a matte black card with my name engraved in silver. Angela Coleman, Executive Vice President. I placed it on the table in front of Sandra. "So about your generous offer of $800 monthly for me to disappear from my son's life, I think I'm going to decline." The silence that followed was absolute. Sandra stared at the card as if it were a poisonous snake. Richard had his jaw clenched, knuckles white around his wine glass. Camille looked about to cry, and Marcus, my son, seemed to be in total shock. "Why?" he asked finally. "Why didn't you ever tell me?" I looked at him fondly. "Because I wanted you to grow up valuing people for who they are, not what they have. I wanted you to build your own path without depending on your mother's wealth. I wanted you to understand the value of work, persistence, humility. But you let me think all these years that I was just a simple administrative employee? Yes, and look at you now. Graduated with honors, building your own career. This wouldn't have happened if I'd given you everything on a silver platter. Richard cleared his throat, recovering part of his composure. Well, this is certainly surprising, but it doesn't change the fact that we were just trying to do what's best for our children. What's best? I repeated. Offering a pittance to push away the inconvenient mother, deciding when and how she can see her own son. That's the best you can imagine, Richard? Sandra intervened, her voice now trembling. You deliberately deceived us. You came here with that charade to make us look— To make you look like what? I interrupted. Snobs? Prejudiced? Manipulative? I didn't make you look like anything. I just gave you the opportunity to show who you really are. The waiter approached discreetly. Would you like anything else, folks? Yes, I responded before anyone could speak. The check, please. When the waiter left, I turned my attention back to the table. Everyone seemed to be in different stages of shock and dismay. Do you know what's the saddest part of all this? I asked, my voice softer now. You really believe that a person's worth is directly related to their bank account. You measure respect in dollars, dignity in properties, love in expensive gifts. That's not fair, Richard protested. You don't know us. No, I replied. You don't know us, Sandra insisted. You don't know us, Richard insisted. You orchestrated that trap to make us look like villains. A trap? I asked quietly. All I did was show up in simple clothes. You did the rest. You offered me the worst dish on the menu. You talked about your luxuries in my presence, expecting to intimidate me. You offered me money to disappear from my son's life. The waiter returned with the check on a small silver tray. Richard reached for it, but I was faster. Allow me, I said, taking the check. The total was almost $1,000. Without blinking, I placed my black card on the tray. That's not necessary, Richard said, his pride clearly wounded. We invited. Consider it my contribution to this educational evening, I replied. After all, I learned a lot about all of you. While the waiter walked away with my card, I turned to my son. Marcus, I'm sorry I never told you the truth, but understand that I did it out of love, not deception. I wanted you to become the man you are today, hardworking, responsible, independent. Marcus shook his head, still processing everything. All those years, the small apartment, the simple clothes, the modest vacations, it was all a choice? All of it, I confirmed. I didn't need a big house just for me. I didn't need designer clothes to feel fulfilled. I didn't need to display wealth to have value. Sandra let out a dry, bitter laugh. How convenient. You make yourself out to be some kind of saint of humility when you really just deceived your own son for decades. I looked at her calmly. The difference between us, Sandra, is that you use your money to control people. I used my discretion to free them. The waiter returned with my card and the receipt. I signed, leaving a generous tip. About your proposed arrangement, I continued, putting away my card. Let me make a counteroffer. I'll give you $10,000 right now if you can tell me one single time when you treated someone without financial resources with genuine respect. Richard turned red with rage. Sandra pressed her lips into a thin line. That's what I thought, I said softly. I stood up, taking my old bag. Marcus, when you're ready to talk, you know where to find me. I'll always be there for you. No conditions, no arrangements, no manipulations. Just genuine love. Camille finally spoke, her voice barely audible. Angela, I didn't know about the money, about tonight. Believe me, I didn't know. I looked at her, trying to determine her sincerity. There was shame in her eyes, but also confusion, as if she were seeing her parents under a new light. I hope that's true, Camille, I replied, and I hope tonight has been educational for you too. I turned to leave, then stopped and turned back one last time. Oh, and Richard, Sandra, you were right about one thing. Money is important, but not in the way you think. The real value of money is in the freedom it provides. Freedom to live according to your values, to not be controlled by others, to help without expecting recognition. It's a shame that with all your wealth, you're still so poor. With that, I walked through the elegant restaurant with my head held high, feeling the stares that followed me. They were no longer looks of disdain for my simple clothes, but of curiosity about the woman who had just paid $1,000 bill and walked out with the dignity of a queen. What makes me happiest is knowing you're here with me in these stories. A simple like or subscribe reminds me we're growing together. When I reached the sidewalk, I breathed deeply of the night air. For the first time in years, I felt completely exposed and completely free. The taxi dropped me off in front of my building an hour later. I paid the fare and entered the simple but well-maintained lobby. The night doorman, Mr. Harris, greeted me as he always did. "Good evening, Miss Angela. Everything all right?" "Everything's fine." Mr. Harris, a revealing night. He smiled without understanding the true meaning behind my words and returned to his magazine. I took the old elevator up 4 floors and entered my apartment. As soon as I closed the door, I felt the weight of the night fall on my shoulders. I took off the worn shoes, left the canvas bag on the floor, and walked to my bedroom. I opened the closet and moved aside the simple clothes I wore daily, revealing the hidden section in the back. There were my executive suits, impeccably tailored suits, silk dresses, Italian shoes made to measure. The Angela that no one except my work colleagues knew. I removed the worn dress I'd used for dinner and threw it in the laundry basket. I took a long, hot bath, letting the water wash away the accumulated tension. Afterward, I put on soft cotton pajamas, a small luxury I allowed myself, and prepared a cup of chamomile tea. Sitting in my modest living room, I looked around. Comfortable but not luxurious furniture, a medium-sized television, not the latest model, walls without expensive artwork, just some framed photographs. Most of Marcus growing up, some from my rare trips. There was nothing here that suggested a woman earning $30,000 a month. And this was the great irony. I really did like this simplicity. It wasn't entirely a charade. Having grown up with nothing, having fought for every penny, I learned to value peace over luxury, tranquility over ostentation. My phone rang, interrupting my thoughts. It was Marcus. I took a deep breath before answering. "Hello, son." "Mom." His voice sounded strange, a mixture of confusion, pain, and admiration. "I don't even know where to begin." "I understand," I replied softly. "It was an intense night for all of us." "Why, Mom?" "Why didn't you ever tell me?" The million-dollar question, literally. "At first, there wasn't much to tell," I explained. "When you were little, I was still building my career. I only started earning really well when you were about 16, 17. And by that time, well, we had our rhythm, our lifestyle. It seemed unnecessary to change everything. But after, when I graduated, when I started working, when I got married, why maintain the secret?" I took a sip of my tea, organizing my thoughts. Maybe it was selfish of me, I admitted. But I was afraid that if you knew, our relationship would change. You'd see me differently. And I also wanted to make sure you were following your own path, not depending on your mother's fortune. There was a long silence on the other end. "And what happened tonight? Did you plan it all?" "Not exactly," I replied. "When you invited me and mentioned you'd told Camille's parents I was simple, something inside me rebelled. I decided to test how they would treat me if they thought I had nothing to offer. No status, no connections, no money." "And they failed the test," Marcus said, his voice now laden with bitterness. "Yes," I agreed simply. "They failed." More silence. "Camille is devastated," he said finally. "She's mortified by her parents' behavior and her own." "And you?" I asked gently. "How are you?" Marcus sighed deeply. "Honestly, I don't know. I'm shocked, confused, angry, impressed, all at the same time. It's like the woman I thought was my mother my whole life was only half the story." "I'm the same person, Marcus, just with a different bank account than you imagined. But it's more than that, isn't it? It's a whole secret life. Vice president of a multinational, executive meetings, business trips, decisions affecting thousands of people. It's a side of you I never knew." He was right. For years, I kept my two worlds carefully separated. Angela, the executive, stayed at the office. Angela, the modest mother, came home. "You're right," I admitted. "There was a separation, perhaps greater than there should have been." "What happens now?" he asked, his voice suddenly tired. "That depends on you, son. On you and Camille." "As for her parents, they left the restaurant furious," Marcus interrupted. "Richard said you deliberately humiliated them. Sandra cried in the car, saying you set a trap for them." I almost smiled at the irony. Interesting how they feel humiliated by being treated exactly how they treat others. They said they're going to reevaluate their support for us, Marcus continued. Whatever that means. Financial blackmail, I translated. Their favorite method of control. Maybe, Marcus agreed. But honestly, Mom, after tonight I'm not sure I want to be as tied to them as I was. Something in his tone alerted me. Marcus, don't make drastic decisions now, in the heat of the moment. Sandra and Richard are Camille's parents. They'll always be part of your life somehow. Even after what they did, what they said? Yes, I replied firmly. Families are complicated. People are complicated. No one is entirely good or bad. Maybe tonight will serve as a starting point for honest conversations, for establishing healthy boundaries. There was a sound on the other end, Camille saying something quietly. Mom, Marcus said. Camille wants to talk to you. Do you mind? Of course not. There was a moment of silence as the phone was passed. Angela. Camille's voice was hoarse, as if she'd been crying for hours. Hello, Camille. I don't even know where to begin. I'm so ashamed, so mortified. You don't need to be, I replied gently. You're not responsible for your parents' actions. But I let it happen, she insisted. I saw how they were treating you and said nothing. I even participated in some ways. She was right, but there was no need to pour salt in the wound. You grew up in that environment, Camille. It's hard to question the values we were raised with. She sobbed slightly. That's no excuse. I should have been better. Yes, I agreed gently. But what's important isn't what you did tonight. It's what you do from here forward. I want to be better, she said, her voice firmer now. I want to be the kind of person who judges others by character, not bank accounts. The kind of person you are. I closed my eyes, moved by her words despite everything. Then start now, I suggested. Not with grand declarations or promises, but with small daily actions. How you treat the waiter, the doorman, the taxi driver. How you speak about people who have less than you. The assumptions you make about people's worth. I will, she promised. And Angela, I'm truly sorry. More than I can express. I know you are, Camille. And that's already a beginning. In the 2 weeks that followed, I lived in a strange limbo. The truth was exposed, but the consequences were still slowly unfolding. Like ripples spreading after a stone's impact on water. Marcus called me daily, asking questions about my career, my financial life, decisions I'd made over the years. It was as if he were trying to reconstruct his image of his mother, filling in gaps he now realized existed. Why did you continue living in this apartment? He asked during one of those conversations. You could have easily bought a penthouse downtown. I could have, I agreed, but this place was always enough. Comfortable, safe, near the park where I like to walk. Why change just because I could? But the budget vacations, cheap restaurants, department store clothes. I smiled, knowing he couldn't see me through the phone. The trips were to places I wanted to see. The restaurants served food I enjoyed. The clothes fit me properly. The point, Marcus, is that at some point in my life, I realized that spending more doesn't necessarily mean living better. There was a pause on the other end. I guess I never saw it that way, he admitted. I always thought if I had more money, I'd naturally spend it on, well, everything. That's what we're conditioned to believe, I replied. That success means consumption, that personal worth is tied to possessions. The conversation with Camille was different, more cautious. She came to visit me alone 3 days after the dinner, bringing flowers. Daisies, I noticed, not the expensive roses or exotic orchids her parents probably would have chosen. We sat on my small balcony drinking tea, me coffee for her. This place is really nice, she commented, looking around. Cozy. Thank you, I replied. It's my refuge. She hesitated, turning the cup in her hands. Angela, there's something I need to ask you, and I want you to be brutally honest with me. Always. What do you really think of me? Not as a daughter-in-law, but as a person. The question caught me off guard. I reflected for a moment before answering. I see someone in the middle of a journey, I said finally. Someone raised with certain values who's now beginning to question them. Someone who has the potential to be much more than the limitations her parents set. Her eyes filled with tears. For a long time I lived to impress my parents, to be the perfect daughter they could show off like a trophy. The right school, the right friends, the right interests. And Marcus, I asked delicately. She smiled, wiping away a tear. Marcus was my first rebellion. My parents expected me to marry the son of some friend from the club, someone from our circle. When I met Marcus, I saw something different. Someone genuine, without pretensions, who valued me for myself, not for my last name or bank account. But you allowed your parents to help him, I observed. The contract through Richard, the house down payment, the honeymoon? Camille looked down, ashamed. I know how that sounds, but you need to understand. It's hard to refuse when that's your family's currency, when financial help is the only form of love they know how to express. I nodded, understanding more than she imagined. Money as a substitute for emotional connection, expensive gifts instead of genuine vulnerability. And now? I asked. Since that night at the restaurant? My parents are furious, she replied, sighing. Dad cut off the monthly subsidy he was giving us, something Marcus didn't even know we were receiving. It was deposited directly into my account. How do you feel about that? Relieved, actually, she confessed. It's like a weight has been lifted from my shoulders. That money always came with unspoken expectations, invisible strings. I smiled, genuinely impressed by her self-awareness. You know what's funny? She continued. Now that I know about you, about your story, I feel almost ashamed of my problems. I mean, you raised a son alone, built an incredible career, all without complaining, without seeking recognition. Don't compare journeys, I advised. Everyone has their own challenges, their own mountains to climb. Camille nodded thoughtfully. Angela, can I ask you another question? Sure. How do you do it? Live so authentically. Not care what others think? I laughed softly. Oh, I do care. We all care to some extent. The difference is, I learned to care more about what certain specific people think, people whose values I respect, and less about the rest of the world. We talked for over 2 hours that afternoon. When Camille was leaving, she hugged me. Not the formal embrace from before, but something genuine. Warm. Thank you, she whispered, for not judging me by the worst moment of my life. Everyone deserves the chance to grow beyond their mistakes, I replied, returning the hug. A week later, I received an unexpected message. It was from Sandra. We need to talk. Just the two of us. Can it be at the cafe in the Grand Hotel Atlanta tomorrow at 11? I was surprised. The Grand Hotel Atlanta was one of the most elegant in the city, Sandra's territory, not mine. For a moment, I considered declining, but curiosity won out. I'll be there, I replied. The next day, I dressed carefully, not in my imposing executive attire, nor in the simple clothes of my daily life. I chose something in between. Well-cut pants, a simple silk blouse, quality leather shoes, elegant without being ostentatious. The cafe at the Grand Hotel Atlanta was exactly as I'd imagined. Crystal chandeliers, soft classical music, waiters in formal suits. Sandra was already there, seated at a corner table. She looked up when I approached, and for a brief moment I saw something I never expected to see on her face. Uncertainty. Angela, she greeted, indicating the chair across from her. Thank you for coming. Sandra, I replied, sitting down. I confess your invitation surprised me. A waiter appeared immediately. Sandra ordered tea, Earl Grey. I ordered an espresso. When the waiter left, Sandra adjusted the napkin in her lap, a gesture that betrayed her nervousness. I imagine you're wondering why I wanted this meeting, she began. The thought crossed my mind. Sandra took a deep breath. Over the past 2 weeks, I've been reflecting on that night at the restaurant, on the things I said, the assumptions I made. I maintained my silence, letting her continue. I'm not going to pretend it was a pleasant experience, she continued. Being exposed like that in front of our son-in-law, our daughter, was humiliating. No more humiliating than being treated as inferior during an entire dinner, I observed quietly. Sandra had the decency to look ashamed. Yes. Well, that's what I want to talk about. Our orders arrived. Sandra took a small sip of her tea before continuing. Do you think you know me, Angela? Do you think I'm just a superficial socialite obsessed with status and money? Aren't you? I asked directly. She smiled without humor. It's more complicated than that. It usually is. Sandra placed her cup on the saucer carefully. I grew up in a family where appearances were everything. My father was new money, determined to be accepted in high society. My mother was obsessed with status, the right address, the right schools, the right connections. That explained some things, but didn't justify her behavior. I was raised to believe that social worth and personal worth were the same thing, she continued. That respect depended on your bank account, that friendships were strategic alliances, that marriages were asset mergers. And you never questioned those values? Occasionally, she admitted. There were moments, doubts. But then I'd look around and see the world confirming exactly what I'd been taught. People treating the wealthy with deference, opening doors, making exceptions. I took a sip of my espresso, watching her carefully. Why are you telling me this, Sandra? Are you seeking absolution? She shook her head. No, not exactly. I'm trying to understand. Understand what? How someone like you, someone with as much money as me, maybe more, can live so differently. Without needing everyone to know it, without using it as a weapon, without making it your identity. I hadn't expected that vulnerability from her. For a moment, I saw past the polished facade to the underlying insecurity, the carefully hidden fragility. The answer is simple, Sandra, I replied finally. I learned early that money is a tool, not a measure of worth. It buys comfort, security, certain freedoms, but it doesn't buy genuine respect, true connection, or inner peace. Sandra observed me for a long moment, as if seeing something new, something she'd never considered before. You know, she said finally, when I discovered who you really were that night, after the initial anger and shame, I felt something strange, something I couldn't immediately identify. And what was that? Envy, she admitted, the word seeming difficult to pronounce. Not of your money or position, obviously, but of your freedom. The way you seemed completely unconcerned with others' judgment. I almost laughed. If you knew how many nights I stayed awake worrying if I was doing the right thing by hiding my financial situation from Marcus. How many times I questioned my choices, my motives. Freedom comes with practice, I replied. And usually after realizing that the alternative, living to impress others, is a much more confining prison. Sandra played with her teaspoon thoughtfully. Richard and I have had several discussions since that night, some quite heated. He thinks we should simply cut ties with Marcus and Camille until they come to their senses. And you? I don't want to lose my daughter, she said softly. And for the first time, I'm realizing that maybe I already lost part of her long ago without even noticing. There was genuine pain in her voice that surprised me. It's not too late, Sandra, I said gently. Camille is still here, still your daughter. But she's so different now, since that night. She confronts us in ways she never did before, questions our values, our attitudes. Yesterday, she refused the credit card we always maintained for her, said she and Marcus prefer to live within their own means. I couldn't suppress a small smile. That must have been a shock. It was disconcerting, Sandra admitted, as if someone had rewritten the rules without warning us. I took the last sip of my espresso. They're not new rules, Sandra. They're older values than money. Independence, self-sufficiency, integrity. Sandra remained silent for a moment, absorbing my words. You must think I'm a terrible person, she said finally. Actually, I don't, I replied honestly. I think you're a product of your environment, just like all of us. The difference is some of us are forced by circumstances to question that conditioning. Others never need to until something forces them. 2. Like a simple mother who suddenly reveals herself to be a high-ranking executive with a black credit card, she completed with a slight ironic smile. Exactly. Sandra leaned slightly forward. Angela, I'm going to be direct. I'm not here just for philosophical reflections, though I've appreciated our conversation more than I expected. I'm here because I want to find a way forward, to rebuild my relationship with Camille and by extension with Marcus. And you think I can help with that? You seem to have significant influence over them now, she observed, without resentment in her voice. They clearly respect you, your perspective. Sandra, I said firmly, I have no interest in being a mediator between you and your daughter. That wouldn't be healthy for any of the parties involved. She seemed momentarily disappointed. What I can offer, I continued, is advice. Listen to Camille. Really listen, without planning your response, without trying to control the outcome. Ask her what she needs from you as a mother. Not as a financial sponsor, not as a social architect, but as a mother. Sandra absorbed my words in silence. "And Richard?" she asked. "He's less receptive to changes." "Richard will have to make his own journey," I replied. "You can share your insights, your new perspectives, but you can't force him to change." Sandra paid the check despite my protests. When we left the hotel, she hesitated before we said goodbye. "Angela, is there something else I'd like to ask you?" "Yes? Do you think you could ever forgive me for the way I treated you that night?" The question caught me off guard. I thought for a moment before responding. Forgiveness isn't something granted once and for all, Sandra. It's a process. It begins with acknowledgement, continues with genuine remorse, and is consolidated with real change. She nodded slowly. "I understand, but I'm willing to follow that path. If you truly are," I added, "then we can see where it leads." We said goodbye with a handshake, not warm, but no longer hostile. A beginning. The following week, Marcus invited me to dinner at his house. A casual dinner, he assured me. Just him, Camille, and me. When I arrived, I noticed subtle changes in the apartment. Some of the more ostentatious furniture had disappeared, replaced by simpler, more functional pieces. The walls, once decorated with expensive abstract art, now displayed personal photographs and modest watercolors. "We're redecorating," Camille explained, noticing my gaze. "We realized much of what we had was to impress others, not because we actually liked it." The dinner was surprisingly simple, a home-cooked meal prepared by both of them, served on regular dishes, not the fine china I knew they possessed. During the meal, we talked about everything and nothing, work, news, childhood memories. Without the tension of secrets between us, conversation flowed with a naturalness we'd never experienced before. After dinner, while Camille prepared coffee, Marcus led me to the balcony. The night was mild with a slight breeze and starry sky. "Mom," he said, leaning against the railing. "There's something I need to tell you." His tone put me on alert. "What happened, son?" "I turned down the promotion at Richard's company." I looked at him, surprised. "The promotion that would make you regional director?" "That one," he confirmed. "Actually, I did more than that. I submitted my resignation." "Marcus!" I exclaimed. "That job was important to you." He smiled, seeming strangely at peace with the decision. "It was important when I believed it was something I'd earned on my own merit. But after that night, after everything that came to light, I realized I never would have reached that position without Richard's influence. Still, leaving everything... I didn't leave everything," he clarified. "Actually, I already have a new job. Lower starting salary, but at a company where no one knows who my father-in-law is, where I'll be promoted or not based solely on my work." I looked at my son with new admiration. The courage that decision required wasn't small. "How did Camille react?" I asked. "She supported me first," he replied with pride in his voice. "She said she'd rather live in a smaller apartment with fewer luxuries, knowing we were building something ourselves." My heart filled. Perhaps Camille had absorbed more from that revealing night than I'd imagined. "And her parents?" Marcus grimaced. "Richard is furious. He thinks I'm being ungrateful, throwing away an opportunity others would kill for. Sandra is trying. She invited us to lunch Sunday, just the four of us, without the usual ostentation." "That's surprising," I commented, thinking of my recent conversation with Sandra. "Did you have something to do with that?" Marcus asked, perceptive as always. I smiled slightly. "Let's say Sandra and I had an enlightening conversation, but any change, if it's happening, comes from her." Camille joined us on the balcony, bringing coffee in simple ceramic cups. Not the fine porcelain cups her parents had probably given her. "Talking about my mother?" she asked, handing us the cups. "Yes," I admitted. "Marcus told me about Sunday's lunch." Camille nodded, sitting beside Marcus. "She's called almost daily. It's strange. She seems to be really trying to listen to me for the first time without trying to convince me of anything, without telling me what to do or how to dress or where to go." "People can change," I observed, "if they have enough motivation. And sometimes," Marcus added, taking my hand, "we need a small earthquake to shake the foundations and allow that change." We sat in silence for a moment, appreciating the night, the coffee, the new honesty between us. "Mom," Marcus said finally, "there's something else I want to ask you." "Yes?" Why did you do it? The complete charade, pretending to be poor when you went to dinner with Camille's parents. I reflected for a moment, organizing my thoughts. I think it was a combination of things, I replied honestly. Part of it was impulse, a reaction to that word simple you used on the phone, as if I were something that needed to be explained, justified. Marcus looked down, ashamed. I'm so sorry about that. It's not necessary, I assured him. But another part was protective instinct. Maybe I wanted to see who these people really were who were now part of your life. How would they treat someone they considered inferior? And they failed the test? Camille commented without bitterness, just stating a fact. They failed, I agreed. But sometimes our failures are our greatest teachers. Camille smiled slightly. I think we all learned something that night. When I returned home that night, I felt a peace I hadn't experienced in a long time. The weight of decades of secrecy had been lifted, and although the process was painful, the result seemed worth it. Monday morning brought something unexpected. My assistant informed me that Richard Robinson was in reception, insisting on seeing me. Surprised, I had him brought in. Richard appeared in my office impeccably dressed as always, but without his usual arrogance. There was something different about him, a hesitation, a vulnerability he'd never shown before. Angela, he greeted formally. I appreciate you seeing me without notice. Richard, I replied, indicating the chair across from my desk. What can I do for you? He sat, seeming momentarily impressed with my executive office. Spacious, with a city view, decorated with discreet but undeniable elegance. Impressive, he commented, looking around. Different from what I expected. And what did you expect? I don't know, he admitted. Something more ostentatious. Maybe after discovering who you really are, I imagined this is where you'd show your true status. I smiled slightly. This is my workspace, Richard. Designed to be functional, professional, and comfortable, not a status statement. He nodded slowly, as if absorbing a new idea. I imagine you didn't come here to discuss my decor, I observed. No, he agreed, straightening his posture. I came for 2 reasons. First, to apologize for my behavior at that dinner. It was inexcusable. The admission surprised me. Richard didn't seem like a man accustomed to apologies. And the second reason? He hesitated, clearly uncomfortable. I need your help, or rather your advice. My advice? I repeated, genuinely surprised. Marcus left the company, he said, a trace of bitterness in his voice. You probably already know that. Yes, he told me. What you might not know is he wasn't the only one. 3 other managers resigned the same week, all citing philosophical differences with company leadership. Richard's management style was apparently causing more damage than just within his family. And how can I help with that? I asked. Richard ran his hand through his perfectly styled hair, a surprisingly human gesture coming from him. You built an impressive career, rose on your own merit, lead people who clearly respect you, not just fear you. I'd like to understand how. So that was it. Richard Robinson, the real estate magnate accustomed to giving orders and being obeyed without question, was facing the consequences of his leadership style. It's not about power, Richard, I said calmly. It's about influence, and genuine influence comes from mutual respect, not fear or intimidation. He looked at me as if I were speaking another language. But how do you maintain control without threats? Without manipulation? Without using money as a tool of coercion? By seeing your employees as complete people, I completed for him. Not just resources to be exploited. In the months that followed that revealing night, I observed transformations I never could have predicted. Richard, to my surprise, became a semi-regular visitor to my office. Our conversations, initially tense and formal, gradually evolved into genuine dialogues about leadership, business ethics, and eventually personal values. I never thought I'd be seeking advice from someone I met. Under the circumstances I met you, he admitted during one of our conversations. Life has an interesting sense of humor, I replied with a slight smile. Sandra also changed, though in more subtle ways. Her initial attempts to reconnect with Camille were clumsy, occasionally falling back into old habits of control and judgment, but there was sincerity in her efforts that couldn't be denied. One Sunday, about 4 months after the dinner night, as we all referred to the incident, I was invited to lunch at the Robinson home. I accepted with some hesitation, not knowing what to expect. To my surprise, the lunch wasn't in the formal dining room, but on the sunny back patio. The table was set elegantly, but without the ostentation I imagined was standard for that house. Sandra personally served the dishes, a home-cooked meal she admitted with shy pride. She'd prepared with Camille's help. We're rediscovering old family traditions, Sandra explained when I commented on the food. My grandmother used to make this dish. I'd completely forgotten until Camille asked about family recipes. During lunch, I noticed how Richard addressed Marcus, not with previous condescension, but with genuine interest in his new job, his ideas, his future plans. There were no veiled mentions about returning to the company, no suggestions he was making a mistake. After dessert, while the men talked about a new community project Marcus was involved in, Sandra invited me to walk through the garden. "You know," she said as we walked among well-tended rose bushes, "I never properly thanked you." "For what?" "For that night, for showing us who we really were." "It wasn't exactly my intention," I admitted. "I was more interested in protecting myself, understanding who my son was getting involved with." "Still," she insisted, "it was a necessary awakening. Painful, embarrassing, but necessary." A year later, I received news I never imagined possible. Marcus and Camille were expecting a baby. I would be a grandmother when they told me in an intimate dinner at my apartment. I felt a joy that transcended any professional success, any financial achievement. "We know it's early to decide," Camille said, holding Marcus's hand, "but if it's a girl, we'd like to name her after you." "Angela." Tears came to my eyes. "We want you to be an important part of her life," Marcus added. "No secrets this time," I smiled through the tears. "No secrets." That night, after they left, I stood on my small balcony watching the city lights. I thought about the extraordinary journey that began at that fateful dinner when I decided to test my son's family. How different it could have been if I'd simply appeared as myself. If I'd revealed my true financial status from the beginning, maybe Richard and Sandra would have treated me with superficial deference. Maybe we would have maintained the facade of family harmony, exchanging expensive gifts on birthdays, attending social events, all smiling for photographs while hiding our true feelings. But we also would have lost the opportunity for growth, self-discovery, genuine connection that came through that moment of raw truth. Sometimes, I thought, it takes a little theater to reveal deeper truth. As I prepared for bed, I passed the closet where I kept my impeccable executive clothing. Next to them, still hanging, was the old gray dress I wore that night. I kept it as a reminder, not of the humiliation I suffered, but of the courage needed to show your true face to the world, whether adorned in expensive silk or faded cotton. True wealth, I learned, isn't in what we possess, but in who we become along the journey. In the choices we make daily, in the people we love, challenge, and inspire to be better. And as my granddaughter would grow in a world very different from the one where I raised Marcus, I hope to teach her the same lesson that took me a lifetime to learn. Our worth is never in our bank account, but in the content of our character. True wealth isn't something displayed, but something lived quietly, consistently, authentically. With that comforting thought, I fell asleep, not as a successful executive, not as a wealthy woman, but simply as Angela, a woman who finally found peace in being exactly who she is, without apologies, without disguises, without secrets. The next morning brought a call from Camille. "Angela, we wanted you to be the first to know. We just found out. It's definitely a girl." "Little Angela," I whispered, my heart full. "Little Angela," she confirmed. "And we hope she grows up to be half as strong and wise as her grandmother." Looking back, that dinner at the Magnolia Room changed everything. Not just for me, but for everyone at that table. It stripped away pretenses, revealed true characters, and forced us all to confront who we really were beneath the masks we wore. Richard learned that leadership through fear creates rebellion, not loyalty. Sandra discovered that authentic relationships require vulnerability, not control. Camille found the courage to define her own values instead of inheriting them. Marcus realized that true success comes from personal integrity, not family connections. And me? I learned that secrets, even well-intentioned ones, can create barriers between the people we love most. Sometimes the most generous thing we can do is trust others with our truth. The old gray dress still hangs in my closet, a reminder that our greatest revelations often come disguised as our simplest moments. That night, dressed as someone I wasn't, I discovered who I truly was, and helped others do the same. Little Angela will grow up knowing all sides of her grandmother. She'll understand that real wealth isn't about the money you have, but the love you give and the respect you earn. She'll learn that being simple isn't about what you lack, but about choosing substance over show. Thank you so much for staying with me until the end. Sharing these stories means a lot to me, but it's your presence that makes them truly special. Let's meet again in the next one, okay?